think she might skip out for a few minutes once I get started and grab a few more of our books, in case anybody's interested. I'll just quickly tell you about us. We moved here a year ago, last August from Colorado, and we've been hunting mushrooms pretty hard for quite a few years now. And you can probably guess what brought us here. It was the mushrooms. We came out here 2 years ago to flee some fires, which were scaring us, and after spending probably 10 days out here at a campground on the lake, we kind of looked at each other and said, could we live here? And we decided we're gonna live here. So we spent half our time in Oregon and half here, and we are out of Colorado. We're not in Colorado anymore. Kristen is on the board of the Wisconsin Mycological Society, and pretty involved there. I am the president of the North American Mycological Society, and we're both pretty involved in some of the events here locally. We have a big foray happening at Northwoods, at what's the resort? Lakewoods Resort. It's called. That's in 3 weeks. And there's another big foray the weekend after Labor Day coming up. That's in 2 weekends from now, down in Baronet. And we have a handout on that if anybody's interested. It's a really cool event. It's a weekend event. The price is right, and you can learn a ton about mushrooms. There's a lot of food and a lot of speakers and really good identification tables, and all the local experts will be there. So that's a pretty cool scene if you want to kind of up your mushroom game a little bit. So I've got about 2 hours of presenting to do in the next hour, so I'll probably move a little fast. It's a big topic. My goal is, though, to give you an overview today, and I may beg off on some questions, like, I can do deep dives into some topics, and I don't think we want to do that today. I think we want to keep it kind of fairly high level and work to make this kind of accessible for everybody. You really got to start with safety. Safety first in a presentation and an issue like mushrooms. And obviously you need to be 100% certain of mushrooms, what they are, and identify them before you eat them. And usually that means you also know what the lookalikes are. I like to say, it's kind of like the poker table. If you're the person at the poker table that doesn't know who the stooge is, right, it's you. If you're looking at a mushroom and trying to identify, for instance, an oyster mushroom, which I have back there, and you're not aware of what the other ones that might look like it are, that you're making sure that it's not, then you're probably not quite ready to eat it yet. And that's okay. One thing I tell people is it's okay to pick some mushrooms a few times, get comfortable with them, learn them, put them on a Facebook group and ask what they are, ask around. You don't have to bring them all home and put them in butter the first time you pick them. Okay, so it's okay to go slow and get comfortable with them, but at the same time, you do not need to be scared of mushrooms. They won't hurt you on purpose. There's only 2 that can kill you around here. They're pretty easy to identify. They're probably worth you kind of learning if you want to know what they are. There's a lot that taste horrible. There's a lot that could make you sick. None of them will hurt you by touching them, though. You can pick them up, you can handle them, you can smell them, you can inspect them, and you will not have any problems, short of you may being the rare person that would have an allergic reaction. Right? So some people might have an allergy to a mushroom, which could happen for sure. I am allergic to a mushroom myself, and as I've talked to many mushroomers, I find often they're allergic to one mushroom or another. I'm only allergic when I eat it, and it makes me throw up. Bad. What's the most favorite mushroom everybody wants to pick and eat? That's what I'm allergic to. I cannot eat morel. So I'm just saying, if any of you know morel spots around here, I'm the guy to bring. Because I will pick them with you and give you all the ones I pick. I don't want them. I can't eat them. So I'm just laying that out there. You can share your morel spots with me. They're safe. This presentation is not going to turn you into an expert identifier. I want to show you 2 books that are good for beginners. These are both excellent books. They're specific to our area. First, we have The Fascinating Fungi of the Northwoods. It's a little smaller book in terms of number of pages, has less mushrooms in it, has nice illustrations, but really good notes to help you understand them. It's a really good starter's book. The other book is Mushrooms of the Upper Midwest. This is the one I typically carry in my pocket in the woods because it does have quite a few more species in it. It has pictures, but it's also pretty detailed. It might be a little much if you're just getting started. But it's also a very nice book. Kathy, who wrote this, will be at all the events I mentioned coming up. So if you get one, she'll sign it for you. By the way, we have both of these for sale back there. I think it's like 18 and 15. And then this book, oddly enough, is the next one, even though it says Mushrooms of the Northeast. Habitat-wise, we're kind of in the Northeast when you talk about habitats for mushrooms. And this one will have, you know, it's got 560 pages of mushrooms, a lot of pictures, a lot of detail. If I can't find something in one of these, I usually go to this book next. And it's $28. So, you know, you need to have a book as a companion to go to the next level here. It's really appropriate that you do that. So that field guide is important. Now, I'm going to say it again, be 100% confident in your identifications. Some of this stuff with mushrooms is common sense. When we go out with people, a lot of people hold up a mushroom and say, is this edible? And I look at it and go, no, it's gross. It's rotten. I mean, nothing is edible when it's rotten. So the first thing is when you pick your mushrooms, you want like produce quality, fresh, bug-free, not smushy, they don't smell bad. You want a nice product. The second thing with these mushrooms is you always cook them. You cannot eat them raw, okay? No wild mushroom, you're not allowed to eat any wild mushrooms raw unless you know better. And if you know which ones you can eat fresh, then that's good. Good on you, and you can do it. But if you don't know, you're not ready to do it yet. Every mushroom must be cooked, and often cooked pretty well. Here's the final piece of advice. Start small. When people have problems with mushrooms, I find they typically gorge themselves on them. They're like, yeah, and they eat a whole bunch. And then they feel sick. Like, when you start, you know, pick a mushroom a few times, learn to identify it, and then maybe take a slice, a teaspoon worth, and taste it. And if that works for you, maybe tomorrow you can have a little bit more. And then the third or fourth time, then you maybe can gorge. But start slow, okay? All right, so that's my safety talk. Let's go to the mushrooms now. Any questions on safety before we kind of move on? Okay. This is the list I was hoping to cover today. It's an ambitious list. I have all of these in the back right now too on display if anybody wants to see them or hold them or smell them. I smell all mushrooms. Your nose can tell you a lot about the mushrooms. I in fact often taste them, mushrooms, and I'll spit them out. But you can only get sick from a mushroom if you swallow it. A simple taste will not hurt you. So if you feel like you want to taste it and see if it tastes bitter or peppery or acidic, that's okay. You can put it on the tip of your tongue. Those are chicken of the woods right there. That was just taken a few miles from here, that picture. I'll show that, by the way. Remember that picture? I'll show it again in a minute. Okay, I'm going to start with oyster mushrooms. These are probably the most common, widespread across the world. You can find them in pretty much any habitat around the globe, different species of them. They are available in stores. People cultivate them. I personally kind of think they're above average mushrooms. You know, I wouldn't rate them as A's, like I don't get excited when I find oysters, but I do enjoy them. I personally like to make jerky out of them. I like to get a whole bunch of them, like a giant amount of them, and I boil them, and then I marinate them in jerky seasoning and I put them in my dehydrator till they get chewy, and it takes this giant basket and reduces it to about this much, like trail snack. It's really delicious. My father loves oysters. He always sautés them in butter. That's his thing. So you can do, you know, cook them any way you want. But for identification purposes, they always grow on wood, dead wood. They will grow like shelf style, often overlapping, and their gills are what we call decurrent, meaning they run, if you see here, the gills run down and onto a short little stem, which connects to the wood. So that's called decurrent. The stem is usually short and lateral, meaning it's coming horizontal out of the tree. if you do a spore test on it and put it like on a piece of paper with maybe a cup or a glass over it for a couple of hours, it will leave light colored spores. Depending on the species, it could be a lilac, a white, a cream, even a light gray. Judging on that, you might want to put it on dark paper. If you put it on typing paper, they're going to be very hard to see white on white. Now I have a piece of old wood back there if you want to check it out with some that they're not like any fresh ones out at this moment that I was able to find, so they're a little knackered. But I also included 2 lookalikes back there. Now the lookalikes, you'll note, they smell horrible. One of them is brown and has spots on it. It's not nice and clear. It's really thin. It's really tough if you try to tear it. It actually has little hairs on the top if you look closely. It's not a pretty mushroom. The other one back there that's pretty looks a little bit like these. They're very gold. However, if you look closely, they don't have those stems and they smell. Those are the worst smelling mushrooms, I feel like. If you want to go back and smell those gold ones. They're pretty nasty. But this is a few different species you may find here. I don't want to get too deeply involved in the different species, but when we talk about mushrooms, we're talking about genus and species. So the genus is Pleurotus. All oyster mushrooms are from the genus Pleurotus. And then from there, you break them down to the species, which is where it gets sometimes kind of difficult. And we have several species available here. These ones over here, these gold ones, are much more common to the south of us, especially on the dead ash trees. And they're invasive. They actually came from China. And they've been spreading across the Midwest for probably 10 or 15 years now, and they're a problem. But you find massive fruitings of them, especially on dead ash trees. One thing fun about oysters are they come out in the spring, they come out in the summer, even in the fall. You can find them all seasons in the woods. So they're a fun one to learn. They tend to be a little bit buggy when they get older. Here's some. This picture was just taken a week ago, right here in Cable. And now those were actually a little old when I cut them off the tree with my handy dandy knife. The stems had all these little holes in them where the bugs had been crawling through them. Now that's up to you if you want to eat those. A lot of mushroom hunters love the bugs and they don't care about them. They often say, oh, I just put them in the dehydrator and the bugs fall out. I'm kind of like, sure they do. Some people call them tiny bacon, extra protein. I tend to avoid the mushrooms with bugs. There's enough bug-free, so I go for the bug-free. But you might want to inspect them. They will also often have bugs on the outside living in their gills. So sometimes people will wash them and even put them in a little salt water, and that will help the bugs on the outside especially come off of them and get out of their gills. I don't know that it helps the maggots on the inside come out, because that's what they are, they're maggots. Sorry, I know I saw your face there. You're like, but I mean, I've watched Lion King, people love those things. Now, a few finer points as you study these, and you might compare those to the lookalikes in the back. The gills are always white or whitish, cream. The ones in the back you'll see have brown gills or dark yellow gills. They always run down the stem, or they're decurrent, like I mentioned. That's about the only fancy word I'm going to use today, I hope. The edges are very smooth, they're not serrated. Also, you may want to avoid any that are really small and really thin that you can see through. Like paper thin ones, those are not oysters. The same mushroom can also grow on conifers. You may want to avoid that. But typically when you're finding them on dead oaks and dead maples and ironwoods and poplars, you're just fine. They're thick mushrooms, they're light in color, and they smell like the ocean to me. Or anise. Does anybody have a different word for a smell? What do you
Yeah, licorice, the anise.
Danny here is, if you want to pick somebody's brain, she knows a ton. So
I'll be at the Baronet thing too on one of the meetings.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. So if you are looking to pick a brain here, do it. So you think they smell like anise or ocean?
Oyster mushrooms.
Oyster
smell
mushroom.
like, yeah, anise to me, but I didn't live at the ocean, or you spend time in Oregon.
I don't know. No, I mean I don't know if they actually smell like the ocean. That's what I think of. I don't even know if that's why they're called oysters. I think they're called oysters for a different reason.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it on oysters.
So I have a question. What
yeah.
is this variety then?
I think that's the pulmonarius. Okay. It's got the kind of ripples and the funny like heart shape, as opposed to being like more just nicely round. So that's what I would guess that is.
You saw that one around here?
Yeah, that was just a couple days ago. Which I think is maybe the same species as the one on the back there.
And that, what tree was that?
I don't know. That tree was dead. It was only like 6 feet tall. It was a dead one, so I couldn't really tell for sure. But I'm not enough of an expert to look at the bark and tell you. But definitely a deciduous tree.
Trent, can we just take 20 seconds? If there's anyone in the back who wants a closer seat or a chair seat, there are 2 over here. There's one right next to me. There's 2 here.
We can also pull,
Come on
if you want to get a
closer.
chair, we can pull one back for you. I'm just looking at you. Okay. Don't be shy. If you want a chair, we'll grab one. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, lobsters. These are fun. These are very charismatic mushrooms. They're out right now in force. In fact, they're getting a little long in the tooth. The ones we've been finding in the last couple days, like half of them are maybe too old. But they're big and they pop up like out of the duff, usually out of pine needles, for instance. And they're this beautiful orange color, like the color of a lobster. And they turn, as they get older, they turn to a dark red. Now I think they're called lobsters simply because of their color. They grow in the ground. So the last one I said specifically, the oyster, remember where that grew? Dead trees, dead wood. These grow in the ground. And by the way, if you look at the 2 tables of mushrooms, that's how they're separated. These ones on the right grow in the ground, and they're called mycorrhizal. They live with trees. They live in the roots of trees. These ones on the left grow in dead wood, and so you won't find them growing out of the ground. And they're saprophobic. They eat dead trees. They might be parasitic too, meaning they kill the tree. Are there? I think I put the chicken over there. I think I got them all organized correctly. So it's the color of a cooked lobster. As it gets older, it smells a little fishy. So we always pick them, we smell them, we squeeze them. If they're soft or smell like fish, we usually throw them back. If they're purple, same thing. We cut them up, they might be a little buggy, we would throw them back. But there's so many of them, once you get the eye, you start looking for these kind of light, these yellow and lighter colors tend to be the ones that you really want to get. And they get big. We've got some big ones back there. They can get quite massive. Now this is a funny mushroom. I think I have some more pictures here. Let me go through the tips here. Oh, they have a white flesh. We find them with pines and hemlocks often, but they're in a lot of different forests here. I haven't really figured out exactly. I think they're with a few different trees. They can be very dirty the way they pop out of the ground, but you can wash them vigorously. They don't care about water at all. You can really get in them with water and clean them out hard. I dehydrate them. I also cook and freeze them, probably is my preferred way. Now it's an interesting mushroom because what happens is you have one mushroom that pops up out of the ground. It's a white mushroom, maybe 2 types. I think it's a Lactarius pipeраtus that they like here. There's also a Rusula brevipes. One of those 2 or both of them for you myco people. Sorry about the Latin. Sorry about my pronunciation of the Latin is what I should apologize for. But what happens is this mushroom pops up and then this other fungus attacks it and turns it red and makes it edible. You can't really eat the mushroom before it's attacked by the second mushroom, this Hypomyces lactiflorum. attacks it. It's like mushroom on mushroom violence. And it totally changes the mushroom into something edible, which is pretty interesting. So when we're out in the woods, we're often looking for the white mushrooms, and that tells us, oh, maybe there's some lobsters around here in this area as well. And these grow, I think, across the whole United States. They'll be with different trees in different places. Like in Colorado, we would find these with ponderosa pines only, which you don't have here. Here, we've been finding them with hemlocks, and I was surprised by that in the hemlock forest. We've been finding a lot of them this last week, like way more than we can pick. We picked a nice basket, and we're kind of done with them. They're not that exciting of a mushroom to eat either. They're pretty good. I like to slice them kind of thinnish and fry them like bacon and make a BLT. They make a really good bacon substitute. Be careful, they'll hold a lot of oil too, so you don't want to put too much oil in them, unless you want a lot of oil in your food. They'll suck it up pretty good. The other way is they're really a firm mushroom, so I like to cube them and put them in soup. And we have a favorite recipe of butternut squash and kind of coconut milk style soup, which you cube these up in, and they're so big and firm that they're really nice in soup. It's like getting like a vegetable in your mouth that is almost crunchy, even after cooking it in soup. People powder these and add them to their food. There's a fairly famous recipe from another Wisconsin native, Alan Turgo. I don't know if he's native, but he lives here. And he powders them up and puts them on like his fish, like his walleye, before he deep fries them. And I've tried that, and it's really good too. So you can do a lot of fun things with these mushrooms. We got so many last night, I cooked them in butter. And I put like 6 sticks of butter, and I cooked them for like an hour. And then I strained the mushrooms out, and I was going to throw them out, but they were so good I froze them. They're like butter candy. And I took the butter, which is now like this red butter from the mushrooms, and it has like a seafood flavor. It's really weird. They're called lobsters because of the color, but I swear the butter tastes like you've had shrimp in it or something. And so I've got like 4 sticks of butter out of it in my freezer that I can slice and cook with. So you can do all kinds of fun things with these mushrooms. Here's a few more pictures. I have these next to the chanterelles on the right over there, just to kind of let you see the 2 different colors. These were all local here. Now we're going to go to chanterelles, which are, one of the biggest commercial mushrooms around the world. A lot of people have weird relationships with chanterelles because when you go and buy them in the store, like Costco, or you go out west where they sell a lot of them, they pick different species of chanterelles, and they tend to be really big and floppy and not full of flavor. Our local chanterelles tend to be pretty flavorful here, and they smell like apricots, and they're really quite divine. Often people think chanterelles are kind of boring, but I think it's because they're buying those ones in the store that the commercial pickers are picking out of the rainforest by, giant boxes of them. Here they're smaller. Usually the smaller varieties are often the best for some reason. I don't mean the smaller mushrooms are better. I just mean our varieties are smaller than the Western ones, and they taste twice as good. And there they are on the right. You can see I'm kind of showing the gill patterns on these. Now this is maybe a younger one. It's kind of closed up. It hasn't opened up like these have opened up a little bit more. They smell like apricots, pretty clearly to me. The thing about the chanterelle is they don't have gills. Those look like gills, but they're not. If you look at gills closely, they're like pages in a book. They're super thin like paper. These are pretty thick, relatively speaking, and they're actually folds of skin that have gone like this. It's actually the skin of the mushroom versus gills, which the mushroom's like this, and the gills are like perpendicular to the mushroom. So if you look closely at these, you'll see that they're not actually gills. And here's that word again, they're kind of decurrent, meaning you can see here the way the gills come up onto the mushroom. Notice, notice the white flesh, and they start to stain often a little bit brown around the edges after you've cut them and brought them home. Now here in Wisconsin, they can be a little bit buggy too. When they get older, they get buggy. So we want to try to get them in the first week or two that they're out, if we can, because otherwise when you cut through them, you'll see tiny little holes going through the entire mushroom. They grow in the ground, and this is important. They don't grow on wood. There is one look-alike, or maybe more, but one in particular that looks a lot like a chanterelle that grows on wood. And you don't want to eat that. It has gills. It doesn't smell like apricots, but you know you still want to avoid it. I'm going to show a picture of that in a minute. Here's a little close-up, and you can see up here now. Back there, can you see these kind of thick ridges? They're not really super thin. This is not a local variety, but here's a western variety that has the same ridges. But you can see the white flesh in the stem, which is a really telltale sign. It's a solid stem with white flesh that will turn often a little bit brown on the edges when you bring it home after you've cut it. Here's another close-up of those gills. Here's another close-up of gills. This is a local one here. And this time the gills, or I shouldn't say gills, this is a close-up of the not gills is what I meant to say. A little whiter in color in this case, but usually they're about the same color as the cap. And these, they don't run real straight and true and neat like some of the others. You can see these have all kinds of crazy patterns in them. And that's because here in Wisconsin, we have several species of chanterelles. So I don't try to get down to the species. I just know they're chanterelles. Now, exactly what species, I don't know. I'm not expert enough. You have to do a pretty deep dive to be able to ID these mushrooms down to the species, knowing that I think there's 6 or 7 in the state. I just know because I heard that. Some more local ones here. These are fun. They kind of have the kind of fatter stems right there. These are a little chunkier, a little beefier mushroom. There's another one you pick around here that's more petite and thin, kind of like these. So that's going to be probably a different species growing here as well. Now look at this. This is kind of fun. One of these is a chanterelle and one is not. Right, so look, if you look, you can kind of tell the one on the left is like a funnel shape, right? You see that it actually has a hole going all the way down it. And the cap is kind of has these little color blobs on it. There it is on the side. Now that's related to a chanterelle, but you don't want to eat this. And you can see it really is different. It's shaped like a funnel the whole way up, and the gills run all the way down the side, and they're a lighter color too. And that is called, I think they call it here a woolly or scaly chanterelle. Is it a gumpus? I forget the name offhand. What do we have here? These are some chanterelles and some lobsters next to each other again. Any questions on the chanterelles? Maybe talk about eating them now real quick. They're good every which way. You know, with butter. A lot of people use them with cream, like a cream type sauce. One thing we don't do, like with other mushrooms, we don't dehydrate them typically. We would prefer to saute them and freeze them. And they're gonna keep their texture and flavor a little better that way. But you can cook them so many different ways. I know, like this week with all the ones, Kristen's been making chanterelle shortbread. She's baking them into shortbread. We love to make something called a duxelle, where we cook it down with onions and apricots, because they really pair well with apricots. Onions, apricots, garlic, stock, sherry, and we like put it in the oven and let it cook until all it's pretty wet with all the stock and sherry, and you let all that bubble off, and you end up with like this thick, it's like jam almost, and it tastes awesome. And then we freeze that, and it's ready to go on food. But there's so many different recipes you can really put chanterelles in. And I think of the mushrooms we've talked about so far, these are going to be the best gourmet so far, and you can cook a lot of different dishes with them. We tend to not pair them with, say, beef. We tend to not pair them with like tomato sauces. They're more of a delicate and a little bit of a sweetness to them. So you're going to want to maybe think about pork and fish and chicken, cream sauces, that kind of pairing with them is usually what you do. Any thoughts or comments on the shanties? They're out now. We've had a kind of a weird dry spell here. I feel like maybe this isn't going to be a good year for chanterelles. I know they're out to the north of us and to the south of us. Have you noticed the weather patterns, how they've been coming through, and like Hayward down to Cumberland gets a lot of rain, and Bayfield gets a lot of rain like 6 weeks ago. I think that's what was feeding the chanterelles, and if you go north or south, they tend to be out pretty well. But around here, we haven't been finding very many locally. Has anybody been finding them here in the last? So they're around. You've got some good spots, I'm thinking. Where do you hunt? She was about ready to say it. If you all hadn't laughed. More on the left. Now, look at that one on the right. Is that a chanterelle? No, although the real answer is you can't tell. You can't tell without tipping it over and looking at the bottom and seeing, does it have ridges? Does it have white flesh? And I'm going to tell you the answer is no. I put that there on purpose. When I flipped it over, it looked like this. And see, I tore up so you can see the inside. It's totally hollow. It doesn't have white flesh, and it has a nice maggot right here with a black head. And somehow I got that in the picture. That's a fake one. You don't want to eat it. And it was growing in wood too. Okay, so moving on. Here's just recently taken some of our local chanterelles from the north of here and some black trumpets. We're going to get to black trumpets now. This is one of my favorite mushrooms, and they grow really well in this area. They are so good, and they're very kind of unique in flavor in my mind. Chanterelles is the genus. I think Phallix is the species here. There's a couple different species you might run across though, depending where you are in the country, and even here in Colorado, I think there's 2 or 3 that you might find. We call them, I think, a fun name, the Horn of Plenty. It's kind of fun to say. So they're pretty dark. You can see why they're called black trumpets, right? They're shaped like trumpets and they're black. But they can be anywhere from tan, like a dark tan, through gray, into black. And if you look at the surface here on them, they have a smooth surface. They don't have gills. You might see some more what we call veins in there, but they're really easy to identify, and they're a really good beginner mushroom. They're very papery, so you're going to want to like pick a lot of them. You might even take scissors and start cutting them because they grow in pretty big clusters in the woods. And we have a nice little pile of them back there too if you want to check them out. They smell, I have a hard time with the smell. Does anybody know what they smell like? What do you think?
My favorite mushrooms.
That's your favorite?
My favorite mushroom, yeah. We put it in cream cheese and make a cream cheese spread for crackers. It's so good.
Did you bring any of that for everybody?
No. I'll bring some to Marinette though.
Do you cook them first in like butter and then put them in the cream cheese?
No, we dried them, and then when we're going to make the cream cheese, we'll cook them down and have a little garlic in there.
Okay.
And then kind of get the butter off it and then put it in the cream cheese.
Okay. So they cook pretty fast because
Fast.
they're pretty thin walled. They dry fast, they cook fast. And I think they dry well.
Smoky flavor.
Yeah, smoky,
Yeah.
like to me they remind me of like a cheese, like a
I put them in like wild rice.
wild rice, yes.
Wild rice soup.
Wild rice soup. I like to put them in white rice. right in my rice with a few other things. A few things about them, like mini mushrooms, they dehydrate very well, and if anything, it makes them more flavorful. Like many mushrooms, frankly, are better dehydrated. Somebody brought in some swillis. That might be a good example of something you might want to dehydrate because it even makes them better. But morels and porcinis and, you know, not chanterelles, but many of them taste great dehydrated. These, when you rehydrate them in water, curiously, the water is very dark. I like to just take the water and drink it.
Soup stock too.
But make soup stock as long as you don't mind your soup being dark, because it's like black water. I'll like saute them out and then put them in my white rice. Otherwise, they turn the white rice like this really dark brown. It would work well in wild rice, though. There's so many things you can do with them. What else? I don't know. They pair well with cheese and eggs.
Finishing butter with port wine.
Finish them with port wine.
Butter, yeah.
Finishing butter.
Yeah. So you would saute them and add, if you wanted to add like some garlic and then you fold it into butter with a little port wine in that saute. Fold it into the butter, and then if you have like a venison steak or whatever, finish the steak with that butter on top.
You put it like in compound butter. You make like a compound butter. You put it in, mix it up, and then you put that on top, like a steakhouse does or whatever. You put that on top of the steak, like an herb butter. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna go home and make that tonight. I like to make butters. Yeah.
Do you find these growing in the ground or
Yes.
on the trees?
They grow in the ground, and they like oak trees here. My experience is I've only found them in oak forests. So let's look at that. Here's a handful of them. Kind of here they're a little gray on the inside. Here's what they might look like when they're a little tan colored. They're hard to see, especially if the light's not good. They're difficult to spot sometimes because they blend right in with these kind of like curled up oak leaves. And when you look down on them, they look like holes in the ground. They're kind of weird. But they grow in big clusters. Now that's Arnie. He's teaching a class here soon, isn't he?
Yep, Wednesdays in September, we have some spots left. It's a series, so it's a 4-week. Yeah.
Dude's a super expert. If you want to really do a deeper dive, how many spots you got left?
I think we have 8 total.
Ooh, better get
It's a
on
series,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll enjoy his class quite a bit. That's him, and if you can see here, I don't know if you can see all, I mean, there's probably like 300 of them right here in front of them. And these are the type of mushroom, when you find a patch, you get on your knees and you just start picking. Like you don't have to walk around and pick one here and there. You get the scissors out and you fill your basket. Because they can grow in very, very great quantities. So I put this up here to kind of say, hey, you guys should sign up for this class. You'll learn a lot. I think it's going to teach more about like mushroom identification and mycology and do more of that kind of deep dive, not like this quick overview. All right. So on to the next mushroom. Let me think if we did any other black trumpet things I should mention. I think we're good on those. Yeah.
So you cut them, you don't dig them out.
No, you cut them. That's correct.
It's cleaner too.
Yeah. You want to. I usually try to focus on getting the clean ones that are kind of tall and cutting them so I leave all the dirt behind because there's always sand in the bottom of them. And then you can wash them for sure. I recently haven't been washing them, and we're making omelets, and Kristen's like, your omelets are kind of gritty. But not very gritty. I cook them pretty clean. But you can give them a light rinse, and sometimes as they get really, when it's a good year and they get big, I often tear them in half because they'll hold little bugs down in the stem, and you know 1 out of 10 you're like, oh, I'm really glad I opened this one. It's a big spider, or whatever. So that I often do that when I get the bigger ones. I tear them open. But if you don't, you'll never notice. I've never cooked them and found the bugs afterwards. So sometimes it's better just to pretend they're not there.
That's where I get confused because with harvesting mushrooms, you shouldn't be digging, correct?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So let me rephrase the question. When you're harvesting mushrooms, should you cut them or should you pluck them? Meaning dig them out. And everybody's got these weird opinions on it, and here's the fact. It does not matter, according to any science that's been done on the issue, whether you cut them or pluck them does not affect the short-term nor the long-term health of the mushroom and its patch. It's up to you. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're talking wives' tales, or the equivalent of some sort of myth that doesn't exist in science. Now, I usually go back and forth. I do whatever gives me the cleanest mushroom. Some mushrooms I pluck. Sometimes I do both. I'll cut some and then I'll pluck some. Sometimes I cut them, pluck them, and then I cut them. I don't think it matters. Whatever you like, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Scissors can be convenient for these guys, though. Yes.
I would add, if you're collecting for identification purposes later on, it would be important to have the whole structure, because sometimes there are hidden components that are, buried a little bit. So if it's purely just to identify and, you're not already familiar and eating it.
Ruin the whole.
Yeah,
Right.
but it's a good point. Somebody brought in a mushroom earlier that had been cut off nicely to eat, and I was like, I can't identify it without seeing the stem as well. So sometimes you do need to see the stem.
Maybe explain how that is a fruit. It's not.
Yeah,
fungi.
yeah, so back to mushrooms are not vegetables, right? You guys get that. Mushrooms, they're their own kingdom. There's animals, and there's plants, and there's bacteria, and there's fungus. And it's a whole kingdom, actually closer to animals than plants, I think, genetically speaking. And the way they work is they live underground in these giant, vast networks, and underneath your foot will be miles of their tiny little, tendrils running through the ground, and they live in the trees, many of them, in the tree roots. And that thing you're picking is very much like an apple on a fruit tree. It's just the fruit of the organism, and whether you pick it or pluck it or leave it, it doesn't affect the cherry tree, whether or not you eat that cherry or whether you pick it off the ground. It just doesn't matter. And a lot of people want to, put them in baskets. I like to put them in baskets because they breathe well and it keeps them fresh. They'll release spores. I don't think they need help. I don't think you walking around with a basket that spores is helping Mother Nature. The mushrooms don't need your help in that sense, but if it makes you feel better, do it. Just don't shame me for not doing it. Now, don't put them in plastic because they can't breathe, and then you get rotten, just like you wouldn't want to go to the store and put sometimes your lettuce in a Ziploc bag and carry it around the woods for 2 hours because it'll get wilty and gross. So often it's just about creating a good environment so you can eat that mushroom later. Thank you. That was, yeah.
Okay, I'm in Ashland County, and have a property, what I've been doing is, when I pick mushrooms, I take, I kind of chop them up, but I'm not gonna use them, I throw them on the ground.
Yeah, I do
So
too.
I actually have gotten chanterelles growing.
By throwing them out in the woods. Maybe.
Yeah, and,
Yeah, people say that.
I got, bullets that started, I never had them, and I've had this for years. So, is that true, or you?
I don't know if it is or not. I hear people say that, but at the same time, have you ever bought a new car? Whatever, you all bought a new car. Have you noticed after you buy it how many more of them you see on the road?
Right.
I don't know if throwing them out causes that to happen or not. I can't say. I know that if you want to grow those mushrooms and do that to grow, you can't grow mushrooms that way. You can't, if you want to grow these mushrooms at your house, what you got to do is grow a forest. Because they're with the trees. Now, did you maybe introduce those chanterelles to your local trees that weren't there before? I don't know. It's nice to think you did it. It feels good.
It did.
But I can't tell you whether it happened yet.
They're just tiny.
Yeah.
But I got them probably a mile down the road.
Now, I think some mushrooms might work that way, but I don't know if those mycorrhizal mushrooms will. The ones that grow on dead trees will work that way,
Well,
more likely.
also, I noticed that if you've got wood chips in your beds, all kinds of mushrooms will grow in there.
Yes,
They like that fruit.
they love the wood chips. Yeah, and wood chips and dead wood you can introduce mushrooms in more effectively and easily than the mushrooms on the left are easier to do that with than the mushrooms over on the right that need a living host tree where they spend their entire life with the tree from, I think they're in the seed of the tree that falls, I think. Many of them start that way. If not, when the tree sprouts, the mushrooms were already in the ground and they start living with that tree. The science is unclear. As opposed to oysters, which you can just take a little stem of an oyster and stick it into a dead tree. It will grow, it will sprout out of that tree next year, potentially. So, those are good questions. They're off topic, but I love them. Yeah.
So how do you know how long to keep them? Do you have to do something with them right away? Do you have to?
You know, if you bring them home, you can wash them if they're dirty, as long as you put fresh air on them and let them get back to not being wet. Many mushrooms will last in your fridge a week or two. Like black trumpets and chanterelles, I feel like if they're fresh, and they're in I put them in paper bags usually, because they breathe nicely that way, and the paper bags absorb a little bit of the extra moisture. They can easily last a week. Some mushrooms will last a little less long, and they have to be eaten immediately. But typically they'll last a week, and you can tell they feel, if they start feeling funny and smelling funny, they're too old. Okay, hedgehogs are next. These are also sometimes called sweet tooths. We've got some of those in the back. They're out in the woods now in a pretty big way. Let's see. What's unique about these, they have these cream to kind of peachy cat colors going on. But what's really unique about them is they have teeth growing on the bottom of them. And they grow in the ground. And here's an example over here. It's a little out of focus. You can see tiny little fat teeth. Let me just jump up one. Here, you can see, and this was just taken this year in the woods here. These are short little teeth, and as they get older, they get these long, kind of snaggly teeth. So that's as they age, and they're still, either mushroom is going to be good to eat. They don't tend to get too buggy. It seems like the bugs don't love these. Now, that's different, no big deal. It's a slug, knock it off. You can still eat it. I'm talking about the maggots that live in the insides of some of these mushrooms. So what you're looking for with these are this color on top and these teeth. And they're pretty easy and safe to identify. They are a little bit sweet. They have a slight bit of sweetness to them. They're very firm. They're going to hold up in a soup. You can pickle them. You can fry them in butter. They're also, I think, a little bland. I find them a little bit boring. After I've eaten a lot of them for maybe a year or two, I'm kind of like, I don't really want to pick a whole bunch more, but they're still nice mushrooms. And they're out right now. They do pretty well right now. And they'll get really big. You'll see big clumps of them this big. But you might find tiny little ones. So you can see here, there could be these little guys, or they could be these big guys like this. And you're going to mostly find now these big chunkers here, which I think are called Hidnum rapandum, I think is what they're called here. And there's some little guys that you might also see that I have not seen in these woods this last week or two. Do you find those little ones here, these umbilicados? Are they earlier in the season, or are they out now? I haven't noticed them. Any thoughts on these? Questions? Or anybody enjoy picking them? Or yeah.
I just want to know, can you eat the stems on these?
Yes, all these mushrooms, you can eat the stems. Everything I've been showing, we eat the entire mushroom. And in fact, a lot of these studies on the nutritional qualities of these mushrooms show that the stems actually are more nutritional than the caps. They will, for instance, have more protein in them. So yeah, there's no problem eating any stems on these. There are occasionally mushrooms where you might want to only eat the caps. For instance, a wine cap, which grows in wood chips, you might enjoy a cap. It tastes better than the stem, but largely we always eat the stems and don't discriminate between the two. So sometimes we cut the stems off because bugs tend to seem to come up from the bottom of them. So sometimes you'll trim up and you'll trim up 2 inches off the stem and the bugs will be gone. That would be the only circumstance. So that's a good question. Thank you. I do sometimes on these guys over here, sometimes scrape the teeth off, but mainly because it's like they gunk up your pan. Like you fry them up and now you've got 1,000 of these little teeth mixed in with your pan and they absorb it, but they get kind of weird. That would be it's strictly a textural thing. The teeth are fine to eat. I think they taste the same. It's hard to tell, they're so small, hard to get the taste of the teeth.
How do you keep those? Do you ever dry those?
I don't. No, I've tried drying them and I have not enjoyed them dried. I would saute and freeze, and they work well that way. Really, I think they're great for pickling. I think if you wanted to try pickling, this would be a good mushroom to experiment with. Usually when we pickle, we're going with whatever your favorite vinegar is. Often people use apple cider or white vinegar. I like champagne vinegar personally for pickling. I like the flavor of it. Usually when I pickle, I will often try not to cook the mushrooms. I'll pack a jar full of raw mushrooms and then I'll pour some pickling liquid on top. The problem with that is they shrink to half their size and you end up with a jar with only this much mushrooms in it. So then you kind of got to work on your strategies to like, okay, I'm going to pour it over the mushrooms and then I'm going to pack them in a jar and then I'm going to pour a little more liquid in. But what I'm not doing is I'm not cooking the mushrooms. I'm letting the hot pickling liquid do the cooking for me. And then I often, based on that, I keep them in the fridge. I call those, cold pickles because they're not shelf stable because I haven't put them in a canner and canned them. You can also can them. Now sometimes that makes pickled mushrooms can make them softer or even slimy. In which case, if you take them out, rinse them off, and put them back in the pan and saute them, you will get the texture back usually. And I think there, when you're talking about pickles like that, I'm not talking about like having a toothpick with a pickle. I'm talking about rinsing them off and cooking a whole meal with them. Not like as an appetizer. Because that's how people, in other cultures, Eastern Europe, where they don't have refrigerators to store and freezers, they would pickle them. And if you don't make your pickling sauce, juice, liquid, brine, if you don't make it too vinegary, it doesn't wreck them with vinegarness. You still got to get to a certain pH. Forgive me, I think it's 4 point. I don't remember exactly what it is. You might have to test it to make sure you're at that pH. But that's, I think, the high level pickling is where you pickle them and you cook with them later because they're not too sour. And they can be really good. And frankly, pickled mushrooms that way bring a lot of good flavors to dishes. That slight bit of sourness that they maintain can bring a lot of flavor into your dishes that can be really desirable. So people that know how to pickle and know how to cook with pickled mushrooms can make delightful dishes. I'm hit or miss. But I've been served them. Okay, we're getting near the end here. Yeah, this is a fun one. Lion's mane, generally we call this. There's a few varieties here that are closely related. A highly medicinal mushroom. This one gets a lot of press because there have been some really interesting studies about helps with your brain function, where they give them to older people that are having some sort of brain degeneration, and it actually improves their ability to remember things, their cognitive skills. It's a pretty fascinating mushroom, very healthy, and it really tastes delicious. It's like seafood. It kind of is a little sweet, a little bit like a scallopy thing going on. Now this one is a proper lion's mane. It's called a Hericium erinaceus. And it has one fruiting body and these big, long, elegant teeth, which, by the way, tend to hold dirt. You got to get them clean, unfortunately. So I'm often trying to find clean specimens because this dirt, it's not dirt. I think it's like part of the tree falling off. Can be kind of hard to clean out occasionally, but it always grows on dead wood. And usually pretty well decayed wood, not like a freshly dead tree, but something that died a few years ago and kind of half rotten, and will grow in big clumps. Now we have a really nice pile of these back here. I'm going to jump up. Here's a similar one, same genus, different species. These grow more like little clusters of grapes, each with their own little teeth, versus one softball with its own teeth. Also very white. That one looks really clean and nice. I like to eat them fresh. I think they're difficult to preserve. This is the one we've been seeing around a lot here, and I don't know if that's normal or if it's just a good year.
I found one too.
Oh, was it clean and nice?
It was really beautiful, and I didn't know where it was, and I left it where it was, and now I'm
Ooh. Yeah, a beautiful mushroom. We just simply just cook it and eat it straight up. But you can dry it and powder it and use it like medicine in your food if you want. You know, some people eat this every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for cognitive reasons. Yes.
Well, I thought I saw one like that, but it was more growing up. I mean, your picture orientation there, is that?
Yeah, it'll grow up. Yeah.
I suppose it would be.
I don't have another picture, but it can grow on the side and even on the top. Yeah.
Again, it's normally on wood.
Yeah, like pretty only on wood and dead wood that's pretty often been dead a few years. Just a delicious mushroom. And we have some samples back there. Now, the ones we picked those today, but we found them a week ago. And a week ago they were white and beautiful and pristine, and we left them. Now they're getting a little bit aged. I really want, like, this was the same tree that one came from. And it's funny, it looks like I turned the picture upside down. It is actually facing down, this one. But there was one right up on top of this log if I dug in the photos. There were actually like 6 of them across the log. We love it when we find these. They are difficult to preserve though. So we try to eat them fresh. I think you want to kind of not cook them too long to kind of keep their sweetness to them. And there's a lot of fun recipes. Our favorite is we do what do you call it, like a potato cake. Yeah, it's not a crab, people do crab cakes with these, by the way. That's the classic recipe, is literally crab cakes. Instead of crab, they use these because they're so crabby-like. We do a potato cake, like a breakfast potato cake with a yogurt sauce. And that's in the book. And we have our cook, Kristen Holt, she went and grabbed some more in another box. We have our mushroom cookbook back there if anybody's interested. We have quite a few recipes for this mushroom in there. Okay, I think this is the last official mushroom. You remember that picture I showed you in the beginning? This is that tree, and what I want to show you is, you can see there were a lot on here. They're also on the back, and we only picked a fraction of them. When you see a big tree like this, it's nice to leave a few. You know, other people, you can see them. You see them from the road. You can see them a long ways away. It's a brilliant orange mushroom.
You typically find them in the same places every time you go.
You know, people say that. Yeah, they say they grow in the same trees, and we always look, and we have not had much luck year after year. And I think we've looked now. We've only been here 3 years looking, and we've only lived here a year, so we've only had 2 seasons. And this one is only starting, and we have yet to find them on the same trees. So I guess they do, but that has not been my experience.
I think they probably kind of use up their food, and so the thing about especially finding mushrooms on trees is that we just have to accept that they're going to come and go.
Yeah.
Like nature does.
Yeah, because it eats the tree. It consumes it. How many years can it consume it before it's gone? Now you will find them on a live tree occasionally. And if that's in your yard, near your house, you better hire somebody to come and cut that tree down, because that tree is going to die, is going to blow over in the next year or 2.
What about the ones that grow on the ground?
Oh, so great question. I'm going to hit that in a second.
Okay.
Hold on to that question. So these are wonderful mushrooms. When you pick them, you want them to be really soft. They get tough, and as they go from the tip to the base, they'll get tougher. So often you might cut them and leave 3 inches of it on the tree and just cut the last inch or 2 off where the soft bit is. Your knife should just slide right into it. If it doesn't slide right in, you're going to probably find it to be a little tough. It very much has the texture of chicken breast, remarkably so. It doesn't have a ton of flavor, but it's nice. But the texture, oh my God, the texture is brilliant. Like, it's the best chicken substitute. And so I like to, well, I'm going to tell you what I do with them in a minute. First, let's talk about it. They're yellow or orange. They can have yellow or white pores on them. I'm going to talk about in the ground in a minute and come back to that. They prefer oak around here. That's the only tree I've really found them on. We did, yeah, I think that's it. That's all I found them on. They often grow in large ones. And you want to spot them from the roads very easily. We see them often in the distance when we're hiking. We're like scanning in the distance looking for pieces of orange because this is an awesome mushroom. Now, there's two species. This is the first species. It's rarer, less common. And it's the Latiparus cincinnatus. And that's this one here. And you can't really tell from this picture, it's growing out of the ground. I think this is a rock right here, not a tree. And it's growing up underneath the rock. And this particular cincinnatus grows from the roots of a tree. So it's actually growing out of dead wood, but it's growing through a thin layer of soil to fruit. So it still belongs on the table over here on the left. Now the sulphurus grows is much more common. It has yellow pores, not white. But you can usually tell it's growing out of the ground, it's a cincinnatus. The cincinnatus is the more desirable of the two. Here's why. There's a percentage of people that get indigestion and heartburn potentially from this mushroom. I'm going to say 10%. Like, I would be careful serving this to a group of people personally. And what we do, and we get a little bit of, sometimes if we eat a lot, we'll be like, oh, I ate a little too much chicken. Do you get that?
I just am always telling people just to eat a little bit at first.
Yeah.
But I haven't gotten indigestion.
You haven't had a problem with it either. I tend to boil them, which people are like, oh, you can't boil. You can totally boil mushrooms.
Yeah.
They're not vegetables. You boil them, and I think it improves them because they get more water in them. Because the other thing about these is they will, if you put them in a pan with a gallon of oil, they will soak it all up. So you don't want to overcook them. So I like to boil them for 5 or 10 minutes and then lightly saute them without putting too much oil in them. And then I'll freeze them, or I'll continue to do what I want with them. I like to give them a good long cook in liquid as opposed to in butter. But I boil them in a lot of water. I dump the water out, and I think that mitigates the chances of me getting a little bit of indigestion because I want to gorge on these things. I want to eat a lot of them, like a chicken breast worth. Yes?
I gorged on them last night, and
How are you doing?
I woke up in the middle of the night really nauseous. I thought I was going to lose it. I didn't, but pretty close.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it.
Yeah, it was. Did you boil?
Yeah, we boiled them.
You boiled them too.
No, we just added water to the pan because they were so dry.
Oh, no, you got to pre-boil them, then throw the water out, and then try that next time. And you might even try boiling them twice if you really want to play around and see how it works. These, by the way, don't tend to do that. If you can find these, man, go for it. Yeah.
Also, too, I heard you guys say they were so dry. Were they hard to kind of cut your knife through?
They were a little dry.
Okay, so that probably meant they're a little older. Usually when you're harvesting those, what we do is take our knife, kind of a cross section in, and to the point where you feel resistance, you just cut that softer part off, and that's the part you want to eat.
Yeah, your knife should go through them
but
like
they're
butter.
even tougher to digest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those, the older ones, I think, also are a problem. I think maybe that's why people, too, have a reaction. Like, we're pretty, like, we only get the most tender, soft ones because we're, don't want that going on. But it's still worth it. Don't let us scare you. I would recommend you start small, taste them, and don't serve them, like I said, like a bunch to people.
And kind of logically, if it's tough, it's going to be tough for your stomach to recognize. So get that solid.
Yeah, a very nutritious mushroom though. It's loaded with proteins and different vitamins and minerals. You know, if you were like trying to survive after, you know, The end times. This would be a good one to be finding. As
I
opposed
find a
to,
lot of it usually.
yeah, a lot of it. Same with, well, we're not doing my talking today. That's the one I didn't have time for. Yeah.
So I'm curious, obviously you mentioned a lot about how you use these to season, flavor, your food. What are the nutritional values that you have found? Obviously you just mentioned that those have very good nutritional values. What is the...
Yeah. Mushrooms are highly nutritional. In fact, many of them, I dare say, are medicinal. And I have a few of those back there, turkey tails and reishi and chaga, which I don't have back there. Very nutritional. Every study shows that if you eat them, they do good for you. And more studies are showing if you eat 6 grams a day of fresh mushrooms, you live longer. You have less heart disease. Your brain works better. I mean, they're damn good for you. And whether that's the store-bought kind of boring ones or the wild ones, you're going to do pretty well. Some, I think, have more protein than others, which means you live off them. Like.
And are there some books out there that you take a look at to get that information?
There are.
Based on vitamins.
Yeah, there definitely are, and I did not bring them with me, but there's several books out there. Look for 2 authors. One is Christopher Hobbs. He has a good book on medicinal mushrooms, and another one is Robert Rogers. I have those. I didn't bring them. If you want to catch me later, I can reference those out to you or email me. But there is a lot of literature and a growing amount that people are turning to mushrooms for health reasons as much as anything. I mean, they are good for you.
So there is a lot of protein in mushrooms.
In some of them, yeah. This one in particular I mentioned is pretty high in protein. Porcini are very high in protein. I believe shiitake are also high in protein. So, yes.
Are either of the ones that'll kill you, do they look anything like these?
No.
Just making sure.
No, the one that's scary that will kill you, the destroying angel, is a beautiful mushroom. It's white. It's perfect. It's like tall. It's something you want to pick and eat because it just looks so beautiful, but you're dead.
It'll be the last thing you do here.
Well, you don't get sick for about 2 days, so you'll have 2 days of good life left in you. The deadly mushrooms, by the way, if you're sick after you eat a mushroom, it's not deadly. The deadly mushrooms take like 2 days before you start feeling sick because they're breaking down your organs. So it's actually, if you eat a mushroom and get sick, anybody that knows anything, the first thing they're going to ask you is, when did you eat this? And the sooner you get sick, the better. Curiously. Yes?
What about the Galarina and the chanterelles?
Well, yeah, you could theoretically confuse the deadly Galarina with the chanterelle. The deadly Galarina, though, is brown, and it grows on wood, and it has gills. So it could happen if you were really, you'd have to be, I feel like, pretty careless to confuse those two.
You look a lot more similar to each other than most, though.
Yeah. We could pull a picture up. I'd have to look it up. Anybody have
I just feel like you gotta get out there with people that know mushrooms. Like, keep looking at them, have people with you, have your books. Build mastery around it.
Yeah, you do.
And then you'll be safer too.
And that's part like why these mushrooms are up here. These are pretty easy to identify. They have pretty easy characteristics. They don't have deadly lookalikes. So that's why they're here and why I'm talking about them. All right. And I'm not going to do the rest. That was the last one.
Please do puffballs.
So the puffballs, I love them. I'm a fan of the puffball. Not everybody is. They could be round like this, or they could be pear-shaped. And we have a few in the back. Let me grab a couple and show you. And I'll show you the pictures. The reason, by the way, many states puffballs are not commercial. And the reason is they could theoretically be confused for a deadly mushroom, and I'll show you how. So with these guys, when you get a puffball, you always cut it in half and make sure it's like a marshmallow inside. And when they start to turn green, like that one, or brown, you see that? It's still a puffball, but it's old and it's going to make you sick. It's not going to kill you. It's just like, it's like eating rotten meat. It's not good for you. So you want these nice white ones. And by the way, this one was white when I picked it a few days ago. It's been in my fridge for a couple days slowly. It doesn't keep in the fridge long. So these have very little flavor. I think they're like tofu of mushrooms. I love to add them to dishes. I'll throw them by the handful into soups or dishes. They just bring a mild flavor. I dry them and I actually make gravy. They make an absolutely superb gravy if you dry them and powder them and make a mushroom gravy based on these. So I tend to pick them and I get a big jar just so I can make gravy with them.
Do you cut them in half to dry them?
Yes, I always cut them in half. And the reason is sometimes I find little specks of green in them. So that's why I'm always cutting them in half. Even when I'm sure it's a puffball, I cut it in half to make sure there's no green in it. And if you don't dry them immediately, they'll start to turn green. So I generally process these immediately if I'm going to keep them. Now, what you want to watch for is that, here's some more what they could look like. Here's what I just cut in half right there, right? You want to watch for that. But here's why they're dangerous. They get really big. They can be this big, 25 pounds. Those are good too. You can slice them like big, like pizza crust and bake a pizza on them. This is the danger right here that why puffballs are not commercial mushrooms. Because, oh, look, I found a big puffball right here. You know, this mushroom is this big. You know, might be confused for a puffball. When you cut it in half, you see what's in it? There's another mushroom inside of it. All this is an immature amanita, which could potentially be very dangerous. So that's why you cut them in half to make sure they're fresh, but you also cut them in half to make sure it's a puffball. And it looks like a marshmallow inside. So for that very reason, it's a more advanced mushroom, and why I kind of ambivalent about teaching it, because there is a danger involved if you don't know what you're doing and you're picking puffballs and you find one big beautiful one and you're not cutting them in half and looking at them. You could do this. So I hope I'm really clear on that. I quite enjoy these mushrooms. But they are tofu-y. They're not going to like crazy, you're not going to build a dish around these.